Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Bartholomew, and I am a resident of Utah. I've lived here for about 2 years. The reason that I moved here from Washington State is because I saw a lot of ethnic studies and Marxist ideology being brought into our schools that I was concerned about for my biracial family. The concerns that I have in regards to race are not specifically about black and brown children or minorities, but as I've gone through and seen how much equity is being brought into the conversation for Utah schools, I've realized that the same things that I was concerned about in Washington are here, and they will affect every student. So I have decided to make this video to point out the issues and problems that I see with R277-328, because those problems are not just for minority children, which I recognize that I have a voice for, but they're really for all children, and that's really where my concerns fall. So this could be called the quote unquote anti-CRT bill, but I want to show you how what they've actually done is instilled the concepts of Paulo Freire, who was an avowed Marxist, into our school practices. So if we look over here at let's just look at the word educational equity in schools. Equity means equal outcomes. That what they'll say is every child is going to have equal access, but that equal access oftentimes means taking away from some to give to others. What we will see that in are things like getting rid of the A through F grading system and instead putting in 1 through 4. So a person can get a 3 and believe that they're doing A minus work when really they're doing C work. So we're kind of blurring the lines there. It says educational equity. This is their definition. Equity means acknowledging that all students are capable of learning and distributing resources to provide equal opportunities based upon those needs of each individual student. Now, if this were the way it actually played out, I would not have a problem with the individual student. But what we're seeing are allowances made for people based solely on their race or solely on their gender identity without a truly individual look that would show that just because a person is a marginalized gender, and I'm using their terms. So I don't actually like words like marginalized because they push us into a collective, and collective is Marxist speech. Equitable resources include funding, programs, policies, and initiatives that support and recognize each student's unique background. Again, what I have seen with that is that we have blanket scholarships or blanket programs specifically for Black or Brown students that have nothing to do with their socioeconomic background or really their needs. And it's just an assumption of need. It leads to an extremely bigoted culture. What I see in saying that there's a diverse people and diverse people need certain ideas is to present us all as if we are a monolith. To kind of explain this, I do a lot of work with studying ethnic studies with a team of people who are very vested in that, because we are all people with diverse family backgrounds, multiracial, interracial adoption, and and also educators. And we all have this concern. So as I'm looking at this word inclusion, whenever I see inclusion, I know that for your basic person, inclusion sounds wonderful. It means we're not excluding anyone. That is not what inclusion means. Inclusion means that we must center around some at the exclusion of others. And that exclusion are the people who typically have had power. That power becomes from being a male who is what's called comfortable in skin or cisgendered. or somebody, especially what we're seeing a lot of, is an attack on faith, how faith is problematic, old fashioned. And so inclusion means that we must celebrate and center around people uh, who have values that we might not personally align with. So, inclusion means the practice of ensuring students feel a sense of belonging and support to the maximum extent appropriate. This is coddling kids. We have extremely low proficiency rates ever since the COVID pandemic, but especially for minorities, especially for the marginalized. I'm talking about 16% proficiency rate in reading for African American students in Utah. But yet we want to focus on making sure that they feel included above all else. So that means that we're not focusing on their academics, we're focusing on their social well-being as being included. And to coddle a person, we've always known before now that to coddle a person does not build true resilience, even if those words are written into something. That's not what's actually happening. What's happening, our kids are becoming more and more demanding, more and more entitled, and less capable of academic rigor. So, educational equity and professional learning. Okay, so let's look at R273283B, aligning teaching practices with the Utah professional standards described in Section 53G 11303, the board's resolution denouncing racism and embracing equity in our schools. So, denouncing racism. What I have seen again as a minority in Utah is that we only are denouncing racism if it comes from a Caucasian person, especially a Caucasian student or teacher, to a person of color. But if you are not in a protected class, then there simply is no protection for you. One example that I would give is a child told me that they wanted to sit on the bus next to another child, and the other child said, "I don't sit next to whiteys." So we're making things worse by constantly focusing on race. And as somebody who has worked in schools as a paraeducator and as a substitute teacher, I've seen that kids do not care about these things until we force them, when we force feed it down their throat. Again, embracing equity in Utah schools. We are embracing equal outcomes. Equal outcomes is not equal opportunity. Equal outcomes means that we have good workers who are down here on the bottom, and we have very wealthy people on the top, and there is no middle class anymore. That's literally what the equal outcomes becomes. Let's look at C, specifically this line, individual and collective responsibility. A lot of the things that teachers are learning right now is that to be an individual is to be selfish, and we must do things to benefit the collective or the greater good. If you know what history means, you know who's used the greater good before, and those outcomes have not been what anyone would be proud of. Again, identifying underperforming students in needs of supports, but we're not really doing that. If we're honest with ourselves, we are graduating people. Again, we have a 16% proficiency rate, but a 98% graduation rate in Utah. So you have to wonder how exactly we're identifying those underperforming students. I do want to praise this collaborating with diverse communities to understand, recognize, and appreciate all that we have in common as humans, including acknowledging diverse cultures, languages, traditions, values, needs, and lived experiences. My issue with lived experiences becomes that the only minorities that are allowed to speak, the only minorities that are allowed to present, tend to be those with the correct kind of lived experiences, tend to be those that are politically aligned in a certain way and not in another way. It looks to me like very good, well-intentioned people created this line. However, those people who want to cause our children harm are master wordsmiths. And I'm being very blunt here because there are people who want to cause our children harm because they believe that the systems that we have in place, all of them, are a problem systemically and that they cause systemic oppression. So is they want to remove childhood innocence, whether or not that be racial innocence of a colorblind society, which many would find problematic. So let's look at implementing principles and strategies of inclusion as they pertain to students and educators with diverse abilities and backgrounds. Again, this is centering around some at the exclusion of others. Strategies of inclusion mean forcing your kids to use pronouns, mean shaming kids who don't, mean wearing pins around that say their pronouns on them. And when some children wear these pins because of because they want to, or because of social persuasion, and others don't, we start to other kids. I mean, there were problems. There's always, since forever, been problems with bullying, but it wasn't a manufactured problem, which is what we're doing when we are taking kids, especially kids from very strong religious backgrounds, and saying, you must forget everything that you believe in order to embrace this new way, which is what is happening. We are re-educating children under the guise of being kind. And again, let's look at this. We are looking for principles of inclusion as they pertain to students and educators with diverse abilities and backgrounds. Well, aren't we all diverse? Is the person sitting next to you exactly you? Are you a clone? If you're not a clone, then you are diverse. But what they mean by diverse is race and gender. This one, G, demonstrating role model responsibilities. As I said before, I've been going through ethnic studies model curriculum, and I've seen that these lists of who are acceptable role models must all they must all believe a certain ideology. They must all fall into being proponents of identity politics. They must all fall into being progressive. And so if you are a person or a family who does not follow into those, you will not be represented. In fact, some of the ethnic studies examples that I have show that they say, while we want to collect all certain views in this certain community, because of time, we need to make sure that the ones that we are choosing align with our values. Let me be clear on what ethnic study values are. And this is relevant because what we're seeing here is just the precursor to ethnic studies. Ethnic studies has two main goals. One, to teach your child to see themselves as a victim or an ally to a victim. And two, to dismantle any systems, which is any societal norm that has kept them down or oppressed them. This is becoming the new goal of our schools. And that's what happens when we put in policies that center around and that accommodate people to the most extreme amount possible. If we go all the way back up again, I just want to go up to the top. So go back to that 4B, to the maximum extent appropriate. The maximum extent appropriate is what we are supposed to make sure that kids feel when they are in school. Not giving them the maximum academic opportunities, but making sure that they feel a sense of belonging and support. Is this school or is this a mental health clinic? If you overlook the last few years, you will find that our kids are becoming less and less responsible. So creating opportunities to recognize personal responsibility. It is important to understand that just because we use the same words does not mean we use the same definition. Responsibility tends to mean being responsible towards the goals set in front of you. Responsible means not harming anyone with your words. Responsible means, and I'm being direct here. Responsible means going outside and protesting until you get what you want. So responsible no longer means I have an assignment, I need to get it in on time. In fact, most of our schools are saying there is no such thing as late anymore. So, or you can't be punished for having a late paper anymore. So what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about responsibility? We're talking about compliance, preserving the rights of all individuals. What are the rights of all individuals? And this is very specific. That preserve the rights, okay, I'm just gonna read it all. Creating opportunities to recognize personal responsibility in contributing to conditions that preserve the rights of all individuals and to avoid the repetition of past harmful actions by individuals and groups. This is social justice. And by social justice, I mean, this is Black Lives Matter style social justice or Antifa style social justice in our schools. That's what it means to be responsible. It means to stand up and protest and use your voice to be an ally. If this sounds communistic, it's because it is. Defending intellectual honesty, including freedom of inquiry, speech and association, and cultivating supportive conditions that focus on learning and remove barriers to allow students to have accessible pathways to resources and opportunities. This almost contradicts itself. We are not allowed free speech in our schools. We are told that if we say the wrong thing, it is harmful, it is misinformation. So when they say defending intellectual honesty, there's something that they're talking about called knowing versus knowledge. And knowing is having the right kind of ideas. This again is progressive ideology. And what's being explained here is called repressive tolerance, which means that anything on this side should be completely accepted, lifted up, seen as truth, including things like men can become women, including things like your child can identify as a fish and should be treated so that they have that maximum extent of support. So there is no intellectual honesty in living that way. We either have reality or we don't. And the progressive ideology is that we don't. That reality is yet another systemic oppression. Cultivating supportive conditions that focus on learning and remove barriers to allow students to have accessible pathways to resources and opportunities. We have seen where scholarships are only going to minorities. So if we go to 3A, a student or educator's sex, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or membership in any other protected class is inherently superior or inferior to another race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or any other protected class. This gets really messy. When we acknowledge gender identity in the schools, you have to choose one or the other. You either respect people's religious rights to not acknowledge that, or you respect people's rights for a boy to walk into class in spandex, high heels, lipstick, and a half top. So this gets into who are you protecting? Whereas if we simply had a dress code and said treat others with respect and have that minimum amount of interaction based on these things, you don't need to know. Truthfully, like, what do kids need to know when they are in school? Because I don't think it should be a constant celebration of who they are. It should be a resource for them to come and learn and to get a good education so that they can have a good future. This is just very, very heavy with sex, religion, and gender identity. You cannot both protect religious values and these other things at the same time unless you don't center around any of it. But if you start forcing kids to acknowledge other orientations when they truthfully don't believe it, you are going to get into a war in the classroom. And it's truly a waste of time, again, for people who are so greatly suffering academically. So this wheel is coming into our schools via ethnic studies. If you look at this wheel, this means that our children in K-12 are going to see all of these different terms. We've got homophobia, sexism, racism, colonialism, classism, xenophobia, transphobia, ethnocentrism, ableism, ageism, heterosexism. And then you have this wheel showing who has the most power and where they stand on these things. So your highest group is a male, straight, middle-aged, Western, able-bodied, post-secondary education, European, i.e. white, urban, as opposed to being country. Cis man, which means comfortable in skin, citizen of American with a high income who comes from being a settler in America, with the language of English, who is married to a straight woman, again, who is white in his race and is Christian in his faith. That is what our children are learning while we say we will not discriminate against religion or race or make someone feel like they are powerful. They're literally looking at a wheel of power or an intersectionality wheel or a wheel of privilege. But we're going to say we can't say that to them. And this is originally from Sylvia Duckworth's Wheel of Power and Privilege. You can find out more about it by typing in intersectionality. The fact that we're teaching intersectionality in our schools literally means we're teaching critical race theory in our schools. And people will say, oh, critical race theory, that's a college course and would never be in our schools. But let me quote Christine Sleeter, who is one of the main advisors for how to bring ethnic studies into K-12 schools. And she actually says that ethnic studies, when guided by critical race theory, is taking things in the right direction. Else, we end up just learning about cultures and having a culture of the month, which is not the direction we want to go. Because then you can't create that revolutionary energy where kids learn to see themselves from a state of oppression. Kids learn to see all of the things that are wrong. Again, this is Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. Thinking like an oppressed is literally what that means. And that's what we are putting into our schools when we start talking about centering around the marginalized and intersectionality, when teachers do teach that American settlers or the white man were bad and terrible people. That does not come home with the kids, unless the parents are geared towards, and hopefully after seeing this, you will be more geared towards asking your children what is going on. So now we're at R27328-4. A big problem with this is C, that contains age-appropriate content for the developmental age of the student. Probably the most important thing that parents need to understand here is that the argument is if your child has a cell phone, they've seen it anyways. So we need to discuss it in class. So who is determining what's appropriate for our kids? Is it the preschool teacher with rainbows all over, who dresses in a non-binary way? Do they get to decide what's appropriate for our children? So 328-5, promoting one ideology over another regarding the topic, including those described in the rule. Again, if we went back to that wheel, that is an ideology. The people with the most privilege are always white is not based in fact. If you went to certain areas in another state like Atlanta, Georgia, you would find just how much power you do not have as a white person. especially maybe a white person who doesn't have that much financially. We are teaching ideology. When you say that we have to acknowledge gender confusion as living their truth, we are teaching ideology. When you say that you have to listen and center around and focus on that oppressed person, and if the person doesn't feel oppressed, then it's because they have internalized white supremacy, you are teaching an ideology. Okay. So, what I want to get across, and that I hope I can get across to you, is that you have, in essence, codified critical race theory by including the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, by including that we must center around and make people feel as comfortable to the extent as possible. You have taken away that academic rigor. You've taken away the goal of going to education, at least as far as most parents believe. Most parents do not believe they are sending their children to school to become leftist activists or even right-wing activists. They think that they're sending their kids to school to get the education that they are told they cannot possibly provide. They are being taught by ideologues who are coming into the schools, these younger teachers, and not all of them, because I have younger teachers who are saying, why in the world does my training have to do with how to queer elementary ed? So while you have said, we're not going to teach critical race theory, but you're still going to embrace Paulo Freire, Kimberly Crenshaw, those kind of ideas, the points of intersectionality. While you've said that, you have codified critical race theory. As you move forward and you bring in ethnic studies into our school, while parents blindly believe that what you're doing is teaching them about different cultures and what a sombrero looks like and what a kimono looks like, you're actually going to teach them revolutionary energy. This has been done before, and that's the whole thing, is the warning's already on the wall. The warning was done under Mao and his Cultural Revolution. The warning was done under Stalin and his young pioneers. And yes, the warning was given to us by Hitler and what he did with the Hitler Youth. But it's also verbatim what happened in Africa just recently, in South Africa, that continues to happen. You center around people, you coddle some people, you other the other people. And eventually we are in a place that nobody wants to be. So I hope that this will help you see that you are indeed putting an ideology into the schools, simply in centering around others and pushing others to the outside. Thank you.